Comic Boom.
Hey guys, Comic Boom here to review Heroes in Crisis issue 8. Oh man, Wally, how far we have fallen, my friend, my hero. Wow, guys, Heroes in Crisis number 8. This is going to be an issue that is going to make some waves. I can't see it not making some waves. This review has spoilers. You've been warned. All my reviews have spoilers, so just get used to it, guys. Wally West, the symbol of rebirth, the powerful symbol of rebirth and hope in the DC universe, was so strong, was so pivotal, was so vibrant in his strength and desire to do the right thing and to find his wife and to find his children lost in the not lost in the Speed Force, lost in the time stream, that he commits suicide. Yeah, he commits suicide. Can you believe that? Depressing as hell. This is really depressing as hell. Guys, Wally West here, the story here is just gut-wrenching. Basically, the entire previous 7 issues have been nothing but misdirection. It's interesting to note, though, that the various scenes of Wally West in the previous issues were all leading up to this. So while some of the scenes were complete misdirection, a lot of the scenes between Harley and Booster Gold were complete fabrications by Wally West himself. As it turns out, Wally West, when he entered Sanctuary, he just felt really alone. And he felt so alone that he just wanted to, he couldn't believe that the Sanctuary, the artificial intelligence that was giving him counseling, psychological counseling, that AI, basically told him that he wasn't alone. But Wally West felt alone, and he felt so alone that he couldn't believe that other people could feel like he does. And when he found out that all the other testimonies and all the other confessions of fellow heroes at Sanctuary, that they were basically deleted, that all that data was deleted, and that there was no record of it for security reasons and to give them a sense of privacy and confidentiality, well, he couldn't believe that. He needed to see what their confessions were. So he somehow used the Speed Force, and he traveled back, and he managed to retrieve all those deleted bits of data lost in lost in computer code, apparently, I didn't know Wally West had the ability to enter into computer programs and to retrieve deleted data, but apparently he does. And he took trillions of bits of data and he put it back together, and in a few microseconds he listened to everybody's confessional, which I don't know how that's even possible given the fact that sound travels much slower than the speed of light. But in any event, he does all this stuff, and it just broke him. While at the same time, Wally West says, I didn't feel alone. For once, I didn't feel alone. But then I also understood that at the same time, I saw all their confessions, and then it broke me. And in that, as it broke him, he sort of lashed out as he's wallowing in self-pity, broken by all the information and the confessional information that he retrieved by putting together that deleted data. He leaves the Sanctuary, but the Sanctuary knows there's been a security breach. They've detected it, and so the alarm goes off, and the alarm startles Wally West, and he lashes out with the Speed Force, and the Speed Force kills everyone in the Sanctuary. That's what happened. It was a complete accident, but he was so broken. He was a broken man. He was just so broken, and psychologically he couldn't handle it, and so the Speed Force lashed out. And it's interesting here now, I don't know that the Speed Force could do that, but apparently he talked about always keeping the Speed Force at bay, that he was always trying to fight to maintain control of the Speed Force. That wasn't my understanding of the Speed Force, but apparently Tom King thinks it is. But in any event, the Speed Force lashed out. Psychologically, Wally West was compromised, and he couldn't control the Speed Force anymore. And then when that loud alarm bell went off at the Sanctuary, that security alert, he panicked, and he lashed out the Speed Force, killing everyone in the Sanctuary, except for, of course, Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. There was also Booster Gold. So Booster Gold and Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy technically survived. Now, he then goes back and he reprograms everything at supersonic speed. He reprograms the entire Sanctuary program, and he basically creates an illusion, a holographic illusion, so that fools both Booster Gold and Harley, making them believe that the other one was seeing the other one do all the murders. And he then rescues poison ivy in such a way that's very, very, very interesting, rather odd, but kind of interesting. And he then travels, after doing all this and setting up the crime scene in such a way, he then travels 5 days into the future, and he instructs his older self, he instructs his 5-day older self to, of what his plan is. And of course, his 5-day older self knows what the plan is. So he travels 5 days in the future, and he kills his older self after his older self tells him about retrieving a rose in Gotham Harbor. Curious. So then he hears about the rose in Gotham Harbor. He then kills his older self, takes the body of his older self back into the present, and puts it and sets up the crime scene, which makes it look like somebody else has done it. And because Wally West is so familiar with how Batman thinks and Superman thinks and Wonder Woman thinks, that they're all fooled completely. They're completely fooled, and none of them can figure out exactly what went on. And he uses those 5 days as he sits back and he waits for those 5 days, waiting for his death, waiting for his past self to catch up to him 5 days hence to kill him. He then basically puts together the confessionals. He sends the confessional tapes to Lois Lane at the Planet. And ultimately, this entire issue is essentially Wally West's confession to Lois Lane saying, look, I'm the murderer, I did it, and this is what happened. And yeah, oh woeful me, I'm dead now, but I did it, and there you have it. Now, wow, there's so much to say about this issue. My first question is, why would Wally West go to all this trouble to cover up his own confession anyway? Why would he go to so much trouble to create a murder scene when he's going to confess to it anyway? What's the big deal? Why? What would... I don't see the point of that. Now, I realize he's psychologically compromised. I realize that, but if he's smart enough to put together a crime scene that fools the Trinity, which probably isn't rocket science because apparently Harley Quinn can defeat the entire Trinity, but that's another topic. But if he can do all that, then why would he bother setting up the crime scene anyway? Why wouldn't he just kill himself? Okay, I get it, he's traumatized. He accidentally kills everyone at the sanctuary with the exception of Harley Quinn and Booster Gold. So why not just confess to it? Why not just kill yourself? Why go to the elaborate scheme of going 5 days hence? And I suspect it's because it's forced storytelling to make this, to drag out this storyline and to allow other artists like Lee Weeks and Clay Mann, et cetera, to draw pretty pictures. But, you know, something's amiss here. Now, also, I'm not sure, since when does the Speed Force lash out like that and can kill people? That was surprising to me. It makes me wonder what the point of the previous 7 issues were. What was the point of Batgirl, Blue Beetle, or all the other nonsense with the Trinity? It seems like all of that was basically noise that was just drowning out the very depressing story contained in this single issue. This is just Wally West being really, really screwed up and in a moment of weakness deciding to kill himself. I gotta tell you, this was a gut-wrenching issue on multiple levels. Like many people, particularly people who've lost people to suicide, and I lost an uncle to suicide about 25 years ago, and there isn't a week that goes by that I don't occasionally think about him, because my uncle was my hero. And you know, one thing that when I look at this and I look at Wally West doesn't see his own heroism. He doesn't see himself how other people see him. He doesn't see his inner hero. He's lost touch with himself. And that seems to be embodied by the fact that he loses control of the Speed Force itself. He's lost his own sense of identity. He's lost his tether. He's lost his connection to who he is, to the hero that he is. He doesn't feel like a hero. He feels alone, despite the fact that the sanctuary, that artificial intelligence kept telling him, you're not alone, you're not alone. And he couldn't get it through his head. He couldn't accept it. He felt alone. He continued to feel alone. And unfortunately, the sanctuary, throughout the various issues, kept reminding him in the holographic rooms that, you know, everything that Wally West imagined, and when he imagined his children, and when he imagined his wife, when he imagined all his interactions, it always seemed to reinforce the fact that he was alone. Sanctuary would ask him, Wally, you know, why is it important? Why are you remembering your kids? Why Linda? Well, why do you think, Sanctuary? I really wonder how stupid Sanctuary is, that the AI intelligence, because I actually think the type of therapy that Wally West was undergoing by the Sanctuary artificial intelligence actually aggravated and made more likely his suicide, because it kept reminding him, you're not alone, but he felt alone. So can't you figure out that your therapy's not working? Now, I'm being a little hard on the AI, because the fact of the matter is, having someone who's experienced a suicide in the family, you're riddled with guilt, and you can't, no matter what you do, you're never going to be able to understand it. And one thing that's very obvious is that when it comes to suicide, people who commit suicide, they make that decision in the spur of the moment. What makes it unique for Wally West is that he has a connection to the Speed Force. So when he, in that moment of weakness where he decides he wants to end his life, he does so in a very uniquely Flash kind of way. He does so by making himself the murderer, setting up his own confession, and doing it in such a way that at least he could save Poison Ivy's life. And this is very interesting, because when he goes into the future 5 days hence and he talks to his future self basically tells him, look, pick up, he basically tells his future self tells him, go pick up a rose washing up on Gotham Harbor. And it's very interesting because on issue 5, on page 22 of issue 5, you see the rose wash up on Gotham Harbor, and you see a shadowy figure pick up the rose. That shadowy figure is, of course, Wally West. Now, what is that rose? That rose contains the life essence of Poison Ivy herself, of Poison Ivy, and it basically blooms. And it's I gotta give Tom King credit, because it is kind of an interesting little story element. On pages 18 and 19 of issue 7, Wally West uses the Speed Force to basically cause the rose to bloom, giving rise to the birth of Poison Ivy, or the rebirth of Poison Ivy. And it's at that precise moment that he interacts with his essentially his younger self. He meets up with his younger self, and his younger self essentially kills him. So just when Poison Ivy is reborn, it's followed by a death. So we've got that cycle of life and death and rebirth all played out with the use of Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy comes to life. Wally West saves her life, uses the Speed Force to cause her to be reborn, basically through the rose as the rose blooms. As the rose blooms, Wally West dies. Wally West's younger self kills his older self, and the cycle begins anew. It's the cycle of life and death and rebirth. And there's something morbidly brilliant maybe about that, but yet frustrating, because I love Wally West and I don't want the guy to be dead, and I don't want to think that my hero killed himself, just like I didn't like to think about my uncle, my hero, 25 years ago, that he had killed himself, that he had chosen the coward's way out. But I forgave him. It took me many years, but I forgave him, because that's what you need to do to move on. And you never know the pain that somebody's going through until they go until sometimes time gives you that perspective. And for Wally West, that time was 5 days, and the manner in which he did it, and the manner of which he confessed and tried to redeem himself in some small way, basically makes this story. This issue is simultaneously a brilliantly written issue. It's riddled with all kind of continuity hiccups, and so you can pick some holes in the plot here. But from a gut-wrenching standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, this issue does have some impact, and I will give Tom King credit for that. Now, a couple of things I want to point out that in previous issues. In issue 3, there were on page 18, Wally West talked about the kids. He talked about how he didn't want to be alone. Also in issue 3, Wally was playing in the sanctuary with his kids, saying, "Come on, Jay, don't be scared. It's just a mask. It's still me. It's just Daddy." Also in issue 3, he asks, "What is sanctuary?" asks Wally West on issue 3, page 6. "What is it about Linda? Please, Wally. Why Jay? Why Iris? Why do you need them?" And again, on page 18 of issue 3, Wally West says, "I don't want to be alone." Sanctuary says to Wally, "You're not alone. You're not alone." Well, it's that conversation that prompts Wally to take the action that he did, to basically lash out and to basically retrieve all the deleted data of all the other confessions and read them, because he wanted to, if I'm not going to be alone, if I'm not alone, prove it. I want to relate to somebody who maybe can relate to me I feel alone. So he listens to all the confessionals, but he still feels alone despite... It's paradoxical, it's schizophrenic, but it's the way he thinks. That's the post-traumatic stress. For once, I can actually kind of see some of the logic, and I can relate to some of it, because in that microsecond, that when Wally West made that decision to kill himself, because he thinks beyond the speed of light, because he thinks beyond the speed of thought itself because of his connection to the Speed Force, he acted on his worst impulse at the worst time, and it ended his life. But even in ending his life, there's a certain poetry to it, with the life and death and the rebirth cycle, using poison ivy as the symbol of the rose that blooms as Wally West's life ends by his own hand. There's a beautiful symmetry to it, while at the same time, I'm a little angry because I love Wally West and I didn't want him to go out by way of a suicide. And it's interesting about the symbol of the rose here. It's the rose itself. Wally West stated in regard to the rose in issue 5 on page 22, Wally West states about the rose that a rose is not the sign of a madman, but the wound of a warrior. The rose symbolizes the wound of a warrior. So the trauma inflicted that all the heroes go through, it's not a sign of a madman if you've got psychological problems. It's the wound of a warrior. And this is where you get into the discussion of what a puddler is. Because a puddler, as he described, a puddler scrapes molten pig iron together and they take out the chunks of carbon and they basically purify it. A puddler removes the flaws and the weak points in metal. But it's almost as if what is wrong with the iron goes into the puddlers. So the idea being that when you're a hero, you take the bullets for the innocent people. You go through the trauma so that the innocent people don't have to. You become the hero, but by becoming the hero, you also acquire the flaws and the imperfections. And you, in order to save everyone, you have to in many ways become the victim yourself. But that affects you psychologically. And hence the phrase puddler. And it really makes up a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense in terms of why he used that phrase puddler. Now we sort of guessed that early on because in the earlier reviews, but it's nice to get some confirmation with respect to that one element of the plot. Many people are going to have issues with one particular element of the story. I mean, namely, obviously, that he kills himself, but also that Wally West goes from a determined father figure who's looking for his wife and children to basically a broken murderer in a single issue. I mean, he literally makes up his mind in a microsecond. The Flash Force, the Speed Force lashes out, killing everyone. And so that really takes, his character really takes a massive hit here. Now, there's some inconsistencies in the stories, or maybe some things which I noticed. I noticed, for example, that in an earlier issue when Lagoon Boy was killed, Lagoon Boy's recollection of his own death is that he was basically pierced with a wooden spike, when in actual fact he was killed by the Speed Force. So in the previous issues where it showed all the other people being killed, we were obviously being showed, Tom King wasn't being honest with us. What we were really seeing was obviously an illusion as well. We were seeing what the program wanted to see, or what Wally West had programmed people to see if they were there. Just like he programmed it so that Harley Quinn would see Booster Gold as the murderer. He programmed it so Booster Gold would see Harley Quinn as the murderer. He also likely programmed it so that we, the readers, speaking outside the comic book, that somehow we saw what Wally West wanted us to see, namely that Lagoon Boy was killed by a wooden spear when he wasn't. He was actually killed by lightning from the Speed Force. And so there's a lot of deliberate misdirection here artistically in previous issues, and in that way it feels a little bit forced. We genuinely were not provided a lot of clues here, and in the sense that we were, it was all deliberate and intentional and forced misdirection. And so in that sense, it's a little unsatisfying, but the story does come full circle here. It can give you a little bit of a headache if you try to make sense of all this. I also wonder how he hid from Barry Allen over the last 4 days. Barry Allen searched the Speed Force for Wally West in the 5 days in the interim between Wally West leaving Sanctuary and ultimately the time that he kills his future self. And why didn't Barry Allen find him? Wally West is very adept at hiding in the time stream, so I suppose I can understand why Barry West couldn't find him, but Barry Allen never found any trace of him. Batman found nothing. Wally West managed to successfully basically allude and to fool the entire Justice League. And that all that rubbishness, all those scenes with Batgirl and Harley Quinn, all those were total nonsense. Another criticism of that I'm gonna have to say here is, Wally West states that what broke him, what caused him to lose control of the Speed Force and accidentally kill all the people in Sanctuary, is that he became a broken man when he became knowledgeable of all the content of all this confessions of all the heroes. The problem I have with that is that because we were made privy to a lot of those confessionals in the previous 7 issues, those confessionals weren't really confessionals. They didn't really reveal all that much. A lot of them were just nonsense. It didn't really express a lot of angst. It didn't really express a lot of... There was a couple that were a little bit revealing, but most of it was just people just talking and sprouting nonsense. It didn't really... We weren't really given any psychological profiles of any of the heroes. I don't know what any of them could have said that could have broke Wally. How could it have broken him? What happened? All they would have said... They've experienced murders, they've experienced all the things he did. So I'm not sure why just hearing all their confessionals would break him any more than his own experiences would break him. But I guess there you have it. That's what we're to believe in order if we're going to make this all fit. At the end of the day, this reminds me a lot of Mr. Miracle. Because it's almost as if, is this really happening? Is this going to be a dream? Is Barry Allen going to travel in the past now and undo Wally West's suicide? Because it seems to me that theoretically, shouldn't Barry Allen be able to do that? If Wally West can do that, why can't Barry? Now, I'm not an avid reader of The Flash, although I do read it. Maybe there's some intricate plot line that's going to involve the resurrection of Wally West in the future. I don't know. But it seems to me that, is this a dream? I mean, I imagine Barry Allen, I imagine The Flash and Mr. Miracle basically right now laying on a beach somewhere, and they're both in a coma in a hospital, and they're living their dream world, and they're living in an imaginary world. And then all of a sudden, boom, we get that Darkseid is, you know? I mean, is Darkseid, maybe Wally West just managed to swallow up a little bit of the anti-life equation, or maybe he came across the anti-life equation in all those deleted bits of data. I don't know. But all I know is that this was simultaneously a very interesting read. This was the best issue so far of the series, but also, admittedly, one of the most frustrating, but at the same time, you know, I want to keep this, I don't want to get emotional here when I do this review, but even 25 years later, I got to tell you that it made me think of my uncle and how much of a pedestal I put him on and how much of a hero he was to me when I was younger. But he was a hero with flaws. In many ways, he was a puddler. And he had his dark side, and ultimately he had his demons, which ultimately led to him making the decision he did to end his life. And his is a different life, but in many ways the analogies to the decisions that Wally West makes in a moment of weakness, when he feels alone despite knowing against all logic that he knows he shouldn't feel alone, but he feels alone nonetheless. And at that moment of aloneness, he makes a fateful decision that he can't turn away from. And lo and behold, you know, it's funny because in the ensuing 5 days, Wally West had 5 days to think about whether or not he actually wanted to end his life. He had 5 days to change his mind. And we're to believe that Wally West had 5 days to think about it, but he never changed his mind. Even 5 days later, when his past self shows up to kill him, he never says to himself, look, I changed my mind. You know, life isn't quite as bad as I think. I got the rose, I saved Poison Ivy, it's all good. Thanks, but no thanks. It's okay, I don't want you to kill me. Thanks, Wally. You know what I mean? Even with the 5 days worth of reflection, Wally West still decided he wanted to end his life. So he spent 5 days wallowing in a pit of despair. Think about how horrifying that is, how horrible that is. 5 days he was alone in his depressed mind. It reminds me of that expression that you shouldn't be allowed in your own mind without adult supervision. Wally West needed adult supervision in his own mind. He spent 5 days, and imagine how slow time would go for Wally West waiting out those 5 days, waiting for his own death, and deciding nonetheless. He didn't change his mind. He still went through with his death. He still let his past self, his younger self, kill his older self and go back and create that cycle. And he tried to create a poetry around it, maybe you could say. He had the rose blooming. He blooms the rose with the Speed Force. So just like the Speed Force he used to kill all those people at the Sanctuary, accidentally of course, it's also the Speed Force he used to save Poison Ivy. So the very source of the destruction of Sanctuary and the deaths of all those at Sanctuary, the Speed Force, is also the same force that creates life by saving Poison Ivy, by making the rose, causing the rose to bloom. And a rose by any other name is still a rose, and upon the blooming of that rose, that rebirth of Poison Ivy, that's when his life ends in that cycle of life and death. There's a poetry to this issue that I think is going to have a lot of people talking for a long time to come. Guys, tell me what you think. Tell me what you think of this issue. I'm particularly, I got to give some kudos to Tom King because the connections are there, and I'm going to put some of the thumbnails up on the screen. The connections from previous issues, particularly issues 3, issues 5, and issues 6, and up to issue 7, particularly with the symbolism of the rose washing up on Gotham Harbor, the saving of Poison Ivy's life, how it all sort of blends in the psychosis, or in the psychological turmoil of Wally West's mind. There was a strange kind of heroic poetry to what he was trying to do, is probably the best way I could do it. But at the end of the day, I just get a little bit emotional because I still miss my uncle, and I'm going to miss Wally West. My only consolation is that this is comic books, and I can only hope that at some point in the future, Barry Allen or some other some other hero with a connection to the Force will go back in time and save my hero, Wally West. If only we could do that in real life, huh guys? It is what it is. Tell me what you think of this very gut-wrenching issue on many levels. Hit the subscribe button. Follow me on Twitter at Metropolis40. And until next time, Comic Boom, out.